Let me start with an explanation. How did this happen? Some time ago, at a breakfast, Athena asked me a question, which is not rare. What is not rare is that my first answer led to another question, and then another question, and then probably 45-minute discussion and conversation. It was about the political world. I like that expression because it reminds me all the time of a Bob Dylan song. We live in a political world. So she told me, this is so interesting what you say. You should write it. I said, it has been written so many times, but maybe not too many people have read it. So what I would be happy to do is to get together and share that. And here we are. And so the way I will proceed is actually the way our conversation went. It started with question about words. Words matter. That is my first degree. It's in philology, linguistics. Not all words are equal. So there will be a few words that I would like to explain before we get into some examples. And one example, I will be quick on it. It's the first democracy that we know of. And after that, I will describe the evolution of a situation 100 years ago in Western Europe that I find appalling, not because of what has happened, but because of the similarity with what is happening today. And then after that, we can have a little discussion, more question, sharing. And I'm intending to do this as seriously, but upbeat, as knowing is free. Knowing better can be inspiring. And the idea behind that is that if we don't know history, history will repeat itself. And I know that several times this is not the first time in over 30 years together that Athena raised some question about history, and always to say, I never had history like that at school. I said, well, dates are just the chronology. History is what you do with those dates. And so here we are. And the question is, we hear all those words, our democracy is under attack. Well, let me explain a few words. And the first thing I will say is that, interestingly enough, the words that we use in the majority of cases are of Greek origin. Starting with the word democracy, which basically means in Greek, power on the people, of the people. The people having power when it first happened, and I will talk to that in a moment. It's not that old. It was not yesterday either. But throughout history, the political world is the power in the hands of a few or even one. And here again, you have those words that go way back to the Greek. A monarch, arche in Greek is the commandment, or having the order, the direction in the hands of monos, one. Then you have oligarchs. Well, oligos in Greek is a few have the power. That's interesting. You also have something that goes very often, if not all the time, with oligarch or oligarchy, plutocracy. That means the power is in the hands of the wealthy, of the rich people. And all those things turn around are in the conversations we have nowadays, plus one. Plus one that is being used increasingly, and Athena said, but what does that word mean? It's the word fascism. And here it's not a Greek word. It's a word that comes from Latin. In the ancient Rome, now we're not in the ancient Greece, we are in the ancient Rome, that is a more recent. The people with power were carrying the politically elected people with power were carrying fasces. That doesn't tell you much more of what it is. It's basically a bundle of rods. That's what the Latin fasces means. Bundle of rods within the middle an axe. And that was the symbol of the authority in ancient Rome. When in the 1920s, after World War I, in Italy, that was not doing very well because they were on the side of the German Empire, the losers. A journalist named Benito Mussolini started activating a reaction. It was a movement of far-right, autocratic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, you name it. And he took the sign, the symbol of power of the ancient Rome as the symbol of the movement he was starting and leading. And that's why that movement was called fascism. And throughout history, I mean, not such a long history, but since that time, political movements that have the same characteristics as the fascist movement in Italy are given that name. Again, far right, xenophobic, anti-Semitic. I could also add white men only. So those are the words we have to play with. Let me just add that the fascist movement in the 1920s in Italy was the first far-right movement in Western Europe after World War I. And I will get back to that. Mussolini inspired Adolf Hitler, not the opposite. Okay. Any question about the vocabulary? Am I clear enough? Next time. The oldest democracy, the oldest society where people of that society have the power because of the word, yes, it's in Greece. It's in the city-state of Athens. It started in the 6th century before the Christian era. So in the 500s. I will not go in depth in that. It's just to point at the fact that that in history is the oldest example we have. But I will say also that it was several times under attacks by what people called oligarchs. So instead of having the whole people of the city state of Athens in control of their life, a smaller group of people will take the power. I must say that it was not because they were smarter or more beautiful. Guess what? They had more money. It happened several times that a group of people destroyed the democracy to replace it by an oligarchy, but the people always fought back and retrieved the democracy. And I think that is important to know. If people fight back, they retrieve their democracy. People must rebel. Okay, I suppose that is clear enough too. Now I go to what happened in Western Europe 100 years ago. There was World War I, famous 1914-1918 war. That was started by the then German Empire. That was actually Austria, Germany, that wanted to get a little bit more territory. And so they started moving out of Germany. The aggressivity from Germany was directed particularly to France. It's a very old story in the European history. But I remember, because of course, growing up in Belgium, I got very, very specific course of history, even already in elementary school. In 1940, the German emperor asked the king of the Belgians permission to come through Belgium to go and aggress France. The king of the Belgians said, no way. Well, they did it anyway, as an act of war. So that conflict developed and little by little became what we called World War I. At some point, the United States got involved, and it was critical. But in 1918, November 1918, they lose. And the German Empire collapses and is replaced by a democratic republic. However, the situation is fragile. And in the early 1919, there is a treaty named the Treaty of Versailles, the royal suburb of Paris, in which, instead of really building a long-lasting peace, the French wanted to humiliate the Germans. And so the conditions of that treaty was horrible for Germany, who of course had to rebuild itself also, but has to pay immense amounts of reparations sums, money, which of course create an impoverishment in Germany, a growing misery, a growing anger, resentment for being put in that situation. Comes a man who is from Austria, has been in the World War I, and has really the intention, is power lust. You know, Adolf Hitler. And so he started a movement that will become a party that we know as the Nazis. It's very interesting because the full name of that party is National Socialist German Workers' Party. It's important. It's a party, or supposed to be, of the National Socialist German workers. The reality actually will become very quickly clear. It is definitely nationalist, socialist, not really. That it was appealing to the workers, definitely. Workers being increasingly unemployed and impoverished, but actually under that denomination, the program was again far right, nationalist, I would say white nationalist, xenophobic, and they need an enemy. So the enemies are the communists, because that's far left, and the Jews. Those are the scapegoats. It's interesting to see that, like in Italy with Mussolini, in Germany, the Nazi movement with Hitler, similar characteristic. It's to build on the difficulties and the anger and the resentment of the people, and pointing the finger on it's because of them that we are in that situation. So what does Hitler do? Well, following the example of Mussolini, who did a putsch and took the power, he tries to do the same thing, starting in Munich, Bavaria, It's well known as the Bierhalle Putsch. There may have been beer, but the putsch failed violently because they tried to grab the power with violence and they were countered with violence. Hitler finds himself in prison. That's when he wrote his famous book, Mein Kampf, My Fight. And it turned out that actually his 1 year, only 1 year, but 1 year retreat in prison made him revisit the situation, and that taking the power by a putsch did not work. Why don't we try to get it democratically through elections? For that, you have to actually work, convince people that they are the solution to their problems, and then they would be elected. It started slowly, but it was growing, and then they were helped by the US. So 1929, the stock market crashed, Wall Street down. Well, it created the Great Depression, not only for the US, but also in Western Europe. Hitler and his Nazi movement were smart enough to use that. And so they grew in the early 1930s. The Nazi movement grew to the point that at the elections, we are in 1932, the early 1933, no, not 1932, November. The Nazi movement wins 33% at the election. That may not seem a lot. However, if you have more than everybody else, then you have the majority. So the Nazi party becomes the #1 party. And it refuses to collaborate with the other parties, which of course create a bad situation. How did the government, come out of it? They made a calculation. We should work with them and control them. Nice. So Hitler becomes the chancellor, which is like the prime minister. And then the president, von Hindenburg, dies. And immediately Hitler steps in and declares that he is the Führer. He's the leader of the nation. And they start doing dismantling the government, the republic, the parliament, or the Congress, one piece after another. They also start what is called in German the Sturmabteilung, which actually translate the storm troops. Those SA that were known to wear brown shirts would all of a sudden appear in the street and start arresting people that looked like those they didn't want and deport them. The beginning of concentration camps. So that grew. Now, Hitler and the Nazi got the favor of the people, not just because they were prettier, but because of what they were promising. They were promising, I want to make sure, they were promising to fix the economy, which was deeply in need to be fixed. To put people back to work and to return Germany to the status of a great power. Well, I must say that they did it. They did it. They built Autobahn, what we call here interstate, developing communication. They create the Volkswagen, the car of the people that was affordable. They put people back to work, and so they got the favor of the people. What's wrong? Finally, we have work, we can make a living. And that helped the Nazi movement with Hitler to actually create a strong authoritarian government. Heil Hitler, a cult. But they were doing well. So you can understand that when people were doing well, they said, well, this must probably be the way to go. And he's wonderful. We were in misery and now we're not anymore. So it grew in the 1930s, but then came something that is always another characteristic of dictatorship. Back to extend the territory. We need to grab all Western Europe that is of Aryan descent, which means white, pure white. Aryanism is a movement, philosophical movement through history that calls for white supremacy. So that develops in the 30s, and eventually in 1939, Europe is getting hot. And the government outside of Germany are growing increasingly concerned, but they don't want to get Hitler angry. And so they don't do anything. Or they believe some promises. But finally, it cracks. And Hitler invades Poland, and it's only the beginning. It's going to go all the way. He wants to put together the white Europe and expel from it what is not white. So that's how things developed over 2 decades after World War I in Western Europe. World War II will cost 16 million dead. It will extend east and west. Eventually, it will end. And there was hope after World War II that it would never happen again. collaboration between Germans, French, American, US American, Japanese. We may have thought that it was solid and forever, and we know that it is not. Hence the subtitle of my sharing, democracy is never a done deal. The question becomes, what could have happened differently? Why didn't Germany not react when they saw what was going on? They were going after the communists. They were going up after the Jews. They were going after the intellectuals, after the schools. The word Kultur was a word that they hated. Hermann Goering, one of people close to Adolf Hitler, had said, "When I hear the word culture, I draw my pistol." Well, it was not a joke. And so after communist Jews, intellectual thinkers, activists found themselves in concentration camp and also sometimes being pure and simply eliminated. So if this is depressing,
No kidding.
no, it is not. Because if we see what has been developing, and I don't think it's very difficult to see the parallel, we don't have to repeat the same behavior. We can actually change the behavior. People in Germany did not react. And so when after they got rid of this, they came for others, and they came for others, and came for others. And you know the saying, they came after it, and then they came for me, and there was nobody left to stand by me. Now, I don't want to be a prophet of bad things, on the contrary. But it is probably time to take the situation seriously and unite and connect. Because, you know, the motto of Belgium is that union makes strength. The lonely one will be eliminated. But sticking together peacefully, because you don't fight when you don't have the power. You know, they have the stick, we don't. But there are many ways together to imagine what can be done. And certainly a first thing is sticking together, it's encouraging each other. We shouldn't become depressed. We should still be able to smile, laugh, dance, sing. They don't look like that. They always have a face like that. We shouldn't have a face like that. Connect. Do what we can do in the democratic process. If those currently in power are not responding, support others to replace them. So this is what I wanted to share with you.